I almost died of an autoimmune disease because I think it was partly because I'd been sleeping so little, like I'd been sleeping 4 or 5 hours for the last 3 years. And then the stress of just losing the company and feeling so responsible and so like such a failure. I realized that I wasn't a failure, I had a failure.
John Bates. He helped Silicon Valley companies raise hundreds of millions of dollars in funding before realizing the true power of communication and soft skills. He's coached many incredible people for the TED Fellows program and events, and has been drafted in to enhance the communication of executives at Google, Boeing, the US Air Force, IBM, and has had the pleasure of training all the current NASA astronauts.
There will come a time when you think everything is finished. That is the beginning.
So you've worked with some pretty cool companies, right? You know, Google, Johnson & Johnson, Inuit, NASA, and you know the US Navy.
So I got to train all the active NASA astronauts. That was just a highlight in my life. Was when I was working for JLabs in Houston doing a live event, for a live public event, and some people came from NASA. So I tell people, don't be the hero of your own talk. Make the audience the hero. Don't be Luke, be Yoda.
I've got a quick favour to ask you. Nearly 90% of people listening to this podcast right now don't follow or subscribe to us. And my goal is to get that down to 80%. So if you've ever liked an episode or a clip that we've put out, please could you click that follow or subscribe button. It helps us more than you know to bring more guests onto the podcast and put out better and better content for you. Thank you. Before we dive into this episode, I want to take a second to speak about our sponsor, Pith Stem, who we are thrilled to have on this journey with us. As someone who is always looking for ways to improve my healthy hustle, Pith Stem's DropTop desk stood out to me as the best full work from home solution on the market. The world of work from home is changing, and a laptop or screen perched on your lap or dining room table isn't enough anymore. It's imperative that we have a solution at home that matches our productivity station that we can have in our office. But of course, homes weren't made to be worked in, and not all of us want a dedicated study. That's why I'm so happy that Pith Stem created this perfect solution. They designed this desk with both the needs of the professional and their home in mind. It's perfect because it allows me to have a full productivity station that suits my needs and helps me get the most out of every minute that I spend at it, not only so I work comfortably, but that I actually enjoy it. And the best thing about DropTop, I can close and lock it at the end of the day to keep work and home separate. And it looks awesome on the wall. You can get your DropTop desk anywhere in the world from pithandstem.com, or just Google DropTop and you'll find it pretty quickly. So John, what is the thing that's happened to you in the past that has most frustrated you and made you the person that you are today?
Ooh, that would have to be, I'll tell you the story. It's October 20th, 2000, and I'm working as one of the founders of a company called bigwords.com, and it's the .com days. And we have raised over $80 million, and we're selling textbooks over the internet to students cheaper than the bookstore. And we've turned down Amazon because we want to take our company public ourselves, And in walk our investors, and they say, okay, guys, the market has changed and you've done a good job and everything, but we are pulling the plug because we don't think that you will be profitable fast enough. And so a few hours later, we all end up at this place called the 21st Amendment, and we are drinking beer and crying. And that's the end of my company, And I was not sophisticated enough to just say next. And I went in a corner and I cried about it, and I felt embarrassed and ashamed and frustrated and just every negative emotion. And I almost died of an autoimmune disease because I think it was partly because I'd been sleeping so little, like I'd been sleeping 4 or 5 hours for the last 3 years. And then the stress of just losing the company and feeling so responsible and so like such a failure, I almost died of this autoimmune disease called Stevens-Johnson syndrome, some weird version. And as I was sitting in the hospital thinking that I was quite possibly going to die, I had a conversation with the universe. I'm not religious, but I'm pretty spiritual, and I think there's something. And I said, I call it the big is, right? The beingness of the universe. And I said, big is, my life has been really small and selfish, and I feel like I've been nice to people, but it's been all about me. And I don't want this to be the end of what I do on earth. So if you'll please let me walk out of here alive, I promise that I will make my number one goal always to just make a difference.
Wow.
And I got to walk out, which was cool. And I feel like I've really kept my word about that deathbed promise, because I think it's easy to forget when you feel better. But I really have, like, the moment seared in my mind. And every day since then has been gravy, because that's really the first question, you know?
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you think it redefined how you look at failure?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what? In fact, here, if like, just for anybody that's listening, like, let me give you a nugget right now. This is what I wish someone would have told me, or that I would have known. And please sear this in your memory, because we're all going to have failures. There's a Western writer named Louis L'Amour. My dad loves Louis L'Amour. And there's a great quote from him. He said in one of his books, "There will come a time when you think everything is finished. That is the beginning."
It's a bit like the Edison quote.
Is that, yeah.
Similar, right? Where he's like, I didn't fail 3,000 times, invented the light bulb. I found 3,000 ways, or 2,999 ways not to do it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
That's so interesting, isn't it? And so at what point did you look at it and go, okay, the failures that I've had in the past are actually just lessons and learnings, so I can take it forward?
Yeah.
How did that manifest for you?
Okay, I got to tell you that story, don't I?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two things. So the first one was, I remember realizing that when I was a little kid singing in this choir group as like a little kid, one of the biggest problems was that kids were so nervous that they wouldn't sing, right? So I remember my glee teacher saying, "Okay, we're going to go out on stage now and we're going to perform. And I just want you to remember, if you make a mistake, just make sure you make it loud." Right? And it dawned on me one day, oh my gosh, okay, well, raising $80 million and failing, like, at least I made it loud, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't a failure. I had a failure. And then the failure didn't have me. And that was a huge breakthrough for me. That was just such a big breakthrough, because up until that very moment, I had been really feeling and treating myself like I was a failure.
I think that stuff is so interesting. I think so many of us put ourselves under so much pressure to achieve whatever success is.
Yeah.
And actually, you think about it, and if you look back and see what any of us have done, it's amazing. Whatever level anyone's at, it's amazing where we've got to. And that pressure actually becomes toxic, doesn't it? And then you have this quote unquote big failure.
Yeah.
Which actually,
dude, that was the big failure for me. Like, I had never failed anywhere near that close. You know, and I let it crush me, you know, because I had the context. This was another thing I realized in the hospital. My context for my life was, oh, you know, opportunity only knocks once. You better make this happen, right? And I put my soul on the line for this company publicly. I said it out loud. My soul is on the line. And then we failed. And in the context of opportunity only knocks once, what do you do when you fail?
Yeah.
Right? But in the context of, how can I make a difference? Okay, you fail, great, keep going. How can I make a difference? Okay, you succeed.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going, right? Like, how can I make a difference? Like, I've seen people be stopped by failure, and I also feel like I've seen a lot of other people be stopped by success. And I think in the context of how can I make a difference, neither of them will stop you.
No, exactly. And I imagine, like, I've not yet raised 80 million in my life for any business, and therefore, you know, I couldn't imagine. I would definitely have told people. You know, it's almost like a bravado thing, isn't it? You're like, I've done this, I've done that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, dude, we had to tell people, because we were always being interviewed for the newspapers, and we were in Wired, and we were, you know, like, we were the talk of the town, right? Oh, these brilliant young men, and I was traveling all over the world talking about the new economy, and like speaking at places like the St. Gallen Business Center, right? And then we go out of business, and it felt like it invalidated all of that.
Yeah.
And what I realized looking back on it, at first I wouldn't let this in because it felt like I was justifying it. But looking back on it, we did a lot of things right. We just didn't make it through that thing because we weren't. It felt like we were playing football, or let's say we were playing hockey, and we were doing really well at hockey, and then the market changed and the game kind of turned into football.
Yes,
but we were still wearing skates, we broke our ankles and like the football players crushed us. And so it doesn't mean that we didn't do a lot of things really well. We did. We just didn't succeed. Okay. So we did ultimately fail with that one, but it doesn't invalidate all of the stuff that we did. They're both can coexist.
And you just look back at it now as a frustration rather than any big, massive negative point, really, I guess.
I look back at it like so that was kind of the beginning of my time in the wilderness. And I was just in the wilderness for what felt like forever. And I don't think I could do what I do now at the level that I do it with the success that I do it if I hadn't failed that utterly, miserably, horribly, and then gone through all the stuff I had to do to get through that and make my way back.
But also to be so open to talk about it. Because that's equally as big as doing the failure, to not hide it away, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned your dad. What was the impact that your father had on your mentality and your I guess, in your upbringing and what you brought into business?
Oh my God. My dad just died like a year and a half ago, so I'm gonna cry. But he was a captain in the Marine Corps, and he was just hardcore Marine. And so I kind of grew up with the great Santini, and I still think it's fun to like do it. Perfect salute, and stuff like that. But he taught me so much. And I think as a parent now, I realize that you're teaching your kids a lot more with what you do than with what you say. And so I watched that guy, and I just, so a couple of things that I think I really took from him, from his example of who he actually was and what he did versus what he told me. He told me great things, but I remember he worked at a big company. They wanted him to allow, as running the legal department, and they wanted him to allow them and okay them to do something that was fundamentally unethical. Maybe it could have been twisted to be legal, but it was definitely against the spirit of the law and against, being ethical with the law. And he wouldn't let him do it. And like a year later, they pushed him out of the company and took his all of the money that he had in his stocks and everything away, and just totally screwed him. And it really crushed him. Like, it hurt him. And I remember feeling really bad for him, and I said, Dad, what do you think about this whole thing? And he said, son, I got to look at myself in the mirror every day, and I can look at myself in the mirror and hold my head high, and that's worth all of it, right? And I was just like, okay, that I'm going to remember, know?
He couldn't really give you a better lesson than that, could he, really?
Yeah.
Wow. So he wasn't the kind of person that would make you feel like failure was a bad thing?
I mean, no, yeah. I mean, I wonder if there's something about that to the Marines, right? Because there's no such thing as failure till you give up, right? I think as a Marine, you get knocked down, you get back up twice as hard, and so I think that was kind of his thing on failure. But I think that society, obviously we get really trained to want to avoid failure and feel bad. And look, I'm not saying go purposefully fail, but if you're playing big games, you are gonna fail. And I don't think I was so clear on that, right? I was like, I'm going to go take these big risks, but I have to win. It's like, no. These are big risks. Yeah. You may not win. And if you're not ready for that, don't take those risks.
Yeah, exactly.
But go take those risks. Just be ready. And how are you going to keep going? And remember, this is the beginning. This is not the end. This is the beginning, right?
Exactly. And to that point, you were prolific in Silicon Valley at raising hundreds of billions of dollars for different startups, right? So
yeah, I mean, it wasn't just me. It was me and my teams, but I was definitely part of teams that raised several hundred million.
Right. So what was it in almost what we've touched on before that, your appetite, I guess, for risk and your attitude that allowed you to be so prolific in such a competitive part of the world, in such competitive businesses, raising this money for businesses?
I mean, it's a really good question. And I think that, so there were a few things. Like, one was from my dad, because I watched my dad work at corporations, and then I saw what his loyalty was rewarded with. And I was like, okay, well, forget that, right? Like, I am not doing that. Like, screw working for a company. So that wasn't even something that was on my mind. So I was definitely not drawn that way. So I was gonna have to be an entrepreneur or part of something different. And then, I think, I ran away when I was 20 with my rock band, and I slept in my car in Venice Beach, and then we played around in California for a few years. And then when the band broke up, I went back to school at UCLA, and that's how I ended up getting into the .com arena. And honestly, at that time, like, it wasn't such a risk, because it seemed to me like when I graduated at that point in the world, I was going to be lucky if I got a job where I would be saying, would you like fries with that? And so, like, the internet coming into existence and opening up some kind of place where younger people could get a foothold and maybe make some money and maybe change things, and like, this was going to be something. I knew in 1987 when I first got on the internet that it was going to be freaking enormous. Like, it was unmissable to me, and no one else wanted to talk about it. But for some reason, I got the bug. And so it was kind of the only thing that I could see myself doing. Like, it was kind of felt like the only option. So I don't feel like I was super brave. I feel like it was like the only thing I could figure out to do.
But you had the skills, right? You had the soft skills.
I did.
So what were those soft skills that enabled you to be so prolific and raise the money for the business, who were then able to then use that money with the people with the hard skills?
Yeah. So I always had the soft skills, and I was always really jealous of the people with the hard skills, because they got paid more, they seemed better. They called what I did fluffy, right? I'm bringing in big money that's paying their freaking salaries, and they call, John, he does the fluffy stuff, right? So I didn't value that. I didn't get the value of what I actually brought until much later, like in 2009 when I went to TED for the first time. That's the first time it really dawned on me that there was value to what I brought. But those soft skills were the key, right? I mean, that ability to go make an emotional connection in our pitches and things. And I remember, we were going around pitching big words and we were having no success. And then I said to my business partner, hey, look, let's not pull out the PowerPoint yet. And let's just make an emotional connection with the people we're talking to. And once we feel like we have an emotional connection, we can tell them about the business plan. But we actually went to places all along Sand Hill Road without a PowerPoint. And we said, we are pre-PowerPoint. And they thought that was so funny and interesting that they would actually listen. And then we would kind of tell them the story of how we came up with this and why we cared and why we wanted to do it. And then once we kind of got that connection going, then we'd tell them the business plan and the logics of the whole thing, the logical part. But then we got massive traction, and all of a sudden VCs are calling each other on the back channels and, hey, we just met with these guys. Have you met with them? What do you think of them? Right? And all of a sudden, boom, we got our first investment, So
had you always been good at that, making that connection?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know where that exactly came from, but I think I was an only child till I was about 5, and I grew up with my parents and a bunch of adults. And I think that for some reason I kind of thought I needed to be charming, you know? So I got pretty good at like talking people up and whatever. And my dad, that's another thing, you know, my dad was just such a charismatic guy, you know? And I remember one time I got in big trouble. We were walking down the stairs at this apartment, and my mom and dad and I are coming down this way, and I'm like 3.5 years old, barely talking. And this really beautiful, like, TWA stewardess in the 60s is walking down, late 60s, walking down the stairs, and we meet at the landing, and I look at her and I go, "Hey, good looking, what you got cooking?" Right? And my mom looks at my dad and goes, "Where did he learn that?" Right? But that's, you know, I mean, my dad would, he would talk to my mom that way, and he talked to people like that, and he wasn't a creep, he was just really fun and, you know, charismatic, and I think I picked up a lot on that, you know, and my brother and I have had that conversation that we just feel like who he was set us up to just succeed in the world, like just because we love people, you know, and we saw that example from him.
Charismatic is a great word to describe you as well. I can imagine around your dinner table in the evening, that being quite a fun place to be back in the day. And I think that's, you know, it's a lot to be said for how people turn out to become, right? Because if you don't have dinner together, for example, maybe you do, but it's quiet and there's no chatting, or there's no almost banter. Like, it's so powerful to people, and it turns in what they become later on. So I can imagine that table being a place of like confidence and let's just have a laugh and learn and be around each other. I'm interested in, like you mentioned there, your first time at TED. Yeah. So TED being maybe you want to explain actually.
Technology, Entertainment, and Design Conference, but it's kind of gone beyond that, and now it's a conference where people give 18-minute or less talks, so very short talks, about ideas we're spreading. And it came out of the Technology, Entertainment, and Design Conference. Still has kind of a focus like that, but now it's about much broader things than just that. And so I went for the first time in 2009, and I mean, it was life altering. It was such an amazing experience, and gosh, there's so many stories about it. But I mean, fundamentally, it was there that I had two big realizations. The first one was watching people give those TED Talks. I was like, that's powerful. That's powerful. Like, call it fluffy if you will, but that's powerful. And I kind of got for the first time that public speaking and that ability to connect with people and stuff was actually really valuable. And then the second realization I had was that even though I always thought I was one of the best speakers at those tech conferences, the bar was really low. And I had not been doing TED-worthy talks. And so I came back from TED and TEDx, and got really involved in the TED and TEDx world. And at one of the first ever TEDx events, we had this guy who had all this hard skills. He had the most exciting topic. I was waiting for him for I'd been waiting for him for weeks because I was part of the team putting it on. And when he got up on stage and started to speak, everybody in the room just checked out because he was so nervous and awkward that we all thought we were going to throw up for him. And I was so sad, right? Because, like, first of all, it was disappointing to me. Second of all, it was like a bummer for our event, right? And he had such an interesting topic, and like people didn't even hear what he said because we were all so uncomfortable as he was talking. And so at first I was disappointed. Then I got kind of mad because I thought about, okay, what has that cost my organizations to have people like that? And then the evil part of me popped out, and I was like, hard skills guys, blowing it, calls what I do fluffy, neener. And as I did that, my buddy came over and he leaned down and he said, dude, we got to do something to help people like this. And I was like, that moment totally changed my life. Because I went home that night, I ditched the chip on my shoulder, and I started working on what I now get to do all over the world. And the thing that made the biggest difference, I think, is something that I don't think I would have thought of on my own any other way. I realized that if I wanted to connect with that guy, I'd have to base everything I did as much as I could in human evolutionary biology and human neurophysiology, so I could show people not only what works, but also why it works based in science. And that it turns out that works really, really well for people with the hard skills, but everybody wants to know not only what works, but why. And when they get the principles about why things work, they can be vastly more creative and successful on their own forever because they know why they're doing what they're doing.
It's so true, isn't it? Like, if I don't know why I'm doing something wrong, I can't change it.
Yeah.
Even if someone says you need to do this, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know what it was that he was doing from your point of view now, knowing what you know.
Yeah.
That made everyone so cringy. What was he doing that making everyone feel
Well, you
so
know,
weird?
it's funny because I talk about this a lot. So a couple of years ago, I went back and watched that talk, and I won't say who it was, but I went back and watched it, and it wasn't as bad as I remembered, which in a way was worse, right? He was just really awkward. It was clear that he was super uncomfortable on the stage, and I think that he had his speech in his hand and was kind of reading it, but trying not to read it, right? And it was just really awkward. And everybody, the vast majority of people in the audience were just so sidetracked by that stuff that I'm positive his talk did not land, you know? And that like, you asked me at the beginning, what's one of the most frustrating things to me? That question, whatever exactly it was, that's probably the most frustrating thing to me, is when somebody who's incredibly brilliant and they have something great to say, and then they don't say it very well, right? And that drives me insane. Like, it makes me like the world is being ripped off because he didn't do a great job. Nobody got his point, and nobody went away with the lessons and things that he wanted to convey that would have been so valuable if he had done a good job. And it's like, okay, look, having a great idea is the place where it starts, right? But if you have a great idea and you can't communicate it, it still makes no difference, right? And so I want people with brilliant ideas to have their communication be as brilliant as their ideas.
And the thing is, communication is never going away, right? Even with AI and stuff, you're still going to have to pitch stuff and do podcasts and interviews because people love human interaction.
Yes.
That's really,
I mean, I think the premium could go higher because of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a good point, actually. So you have to get better and better and better. Exactly. I mean, so you've become the go-to guy globally for communications coaching and making your speech become TED-worthy, right? So why would someone do a TED Talk?
I mean, look, let's just be straight. The first reason, I think, for most of us is our ego, right? We want to be able to say we gave a TED Talk. And candidly, I got invited to speak at TED on a side stage in 2010, and I blew it for that reason. It was a disaster because I made it all about me. I wrote it, if you Google John Bates TED fail, I wrote an article at Forbes that people can find, and it talks about all the mistakes I made. But so that's one of the first reasons, right? But getting over that reason, I think the much better reason to give a TED Talk is because you have had a lifetime of experience. And if you are willing to sift through that experience and really think about it and dig down to find your one idea we're spreading, and then you share it with your full heart as well as you can, so it makes a difference for us, like, that's just super fulfilling, right? And if you do that, like, it'll pay benefits, right? But if you go in to get the benefits, it's ironic it won't work. But if you go in without caring about the benefits and you just really do it for the right reason, you accrue a lot of benefits. But the reason to do it is because you've got this unique life lesson that you could share, that maybe somebody else has said something similar, but those people who are going to hear it from you, they didn't get it when that person said it. They need it the way you say it. And when you go say that, you change lives. And that's the reason to go do it, I think.
I think it's really interesting. I think it's a really good point that it's not just self-promotion.
Yeah, if you do it for that reason, you will fail.
There's also a big journey to get there, right? You've got even the best speakers in the world. I'm sure they still get nervous, and you've still got to plan what you're going to say and make it land well. And
TED speakers work on their talk, creating and practicing, most of them for a year.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay, for a year.
At least a year. Yeah.
I just want to briefly interrupt this podcast so I can talk to you about Nutrition Kitchen, who have kindly sponsored this episode. As entrepreneurs who are looking to stay as healthy as possible, fueling ourselves with high quality food without breaking the bank or wasting time can be tough day to day. Nutrition Kitchen solves that issue by delivering incredible meals to your door, tailored to your diet, whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, or maintain balance. They change their menus all the time so you can choose from a variety of dishes and leave the monotony of meal prepping behind. Now, back to our guest. So you've worked with some pretty cool companies, right? You know, Google, Johnson & Johnson, Inuit, NASA, and the US Navy. Yeah. So we know why they want to do a talk. Or they might not be doing a TED talk, but they're going to do a talk to someone or communicate better at least. Yeah. What are some of the problems that they come to you with? What are they struggling with when they come to you?
Well, I think that there are a few things, but I think one of the key things is I worked with one of those big companies with a guy who was in like the VP level at this huge global company, and they wanted to move him into the C-suite. But the woman who ran HR called me up and said, hey, we've got this guy and he's super brilliant. He's extremely capable. Everybody loves him. He does great work, but he keeps his cards really close to his chest and nobody feels like they really know him. And people want to know their leaders. And I was like, whoa, that's brilliant, right? Like, that's really deep. People do want to know their leaders. And so to go to those top levels of leadership, especially at these large organizations, but even at your entrepreneurial smaller company, like, you're the leader. And if you can't tell your stories and share yourself in a way that connects with people, you will never be as successful as you could be, right? And I always say to people, communicating with human beings is not logical. You may have noticed. It's not logical, it's biological. And when you understand the biology, you can make it logical again. But anybody who goes in thinking logic by itself should win will just never be all that successful with human beings.
That's actually a really interesting point, because so we're recording this a few days before the US election, right? And we won't give any political opinions, but what's interesting...
I have some, but...
What's really interesting, though, is that Donald Trump, he's been going on lots of podcasts and TikTok and stuff, and he's been talking to people, and he's not even giving political manifestos, really. He's just talking about the food he likes or the golf round he's playing. And it's all just communication to link to different people, right? He's talking about how many times a week he eats McDonald's or how many rounds of golf he plays. And it's just so interesting to see that campaign running, you know?
I mean, listen, this might give away my politics a little bit, but it's one of the reasons I am so deeply motivated to work with good people on the light side of the force, because I believe the dark side of the force has all my tools and they know how to do this really, really well. And they do it without compunction and without ethics, but they know, right? So like that lightsaber, it's going to work in Luke Skywalker's hand. It's also going to work in Darth Vader's hand. Yeah, I don't know.
Your pen. I've just looked. For people watching, I was looking for John's pen. He's got a pen branded up. Actually, can you pass the pen, please? Thank you. John's branded up pen. You show them if you're watching.
Well, so I tell people, don't be the hero of your own talk. Make the audience the hero. Don't be Luke. Be Yoda.
I love the pen has now turned into a lightsaber.
But so that lightsaber works in Darth Vader's hand equally well as it does in Luke Skywalker's hand, right? What it's doing is fundamentally different, but the lightsaber, the tool itself, is highly functional. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that I like working with ethical, good people. And I make a distinction between manipulation and influence, right? Manipulation is inauthentic and it's selfish and it leaves everybody feeling a little dirty. And we've seen people trying to be influential who are actually manipulating so much that really good people don't want to do that, right? So they shy away from using the lightsaber at all. And that's a huge mistake. Influence is when it's authentic and it's got everybody's best interests at heart, and it's, that's influence, and it's distinct from manipulation, and it's when it's done well for the light side of the force. That's influence. And so I feel like fundamentally these are principles of influence, whether it's one-on-one, one-to-many, live, virtual, whatever. These are the principles that help you influence human beings. And the dark side has this stuff down.
Do you think the dark side has this stuff down because they're lacking that moral compass? Or do you think the people who are on the light side are doing it for the right reasons just lack a little bit, they lack a bit of confidence? They know what to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the reasons, I say this often in my trainings fairly early on, I know that some of you are resisting this kind of stuff, right? And you don't want to tell a personal story. Like when I'm working with healthcare startups or big CEOs at companies, a lot of times they're like, I don't want to tell that personal story about my dad because I've seen these, we've seen people do that as a manipulation and maybe make up a story about a patient or something. And it's super obvious that it's made up and it's not authentic and it's pretty lame and they're just trying to manipulate us with it. Okay, just because somebody has done that in the past, okay, I don't want you to do that. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about an authentic, true story that genuinely influenced why you chose to do this. And if you don't tell that story, you are ripping everybody off for something really important about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. So it comes down to a lot about connection as well, doesn't it?
Very much.
And you touched on leaders. You work with a lot of leaders. You really only work with leaders, right? Of whatever company.
Typically, yeah.
Yeah, really high level leaders. And so I'm interested to know what a good leader looks like to you.
So there's a lot of things. Fundamentally, my mentor, R.B. Hackenberg, said it really, really well when I was working with him at bigwords.com. I was the first person there to bring in my boss, and I brought in my mentor, R.B. Hackenberg, who's just world renowned. He's just classy, great guy. And one of the things that he told me that has really stayed with me is he said, if you look at these really good leaders, you start to notice something. They just love people. And I was like, ooh, damn, that's true, There's nothing wrong with loving people. In fact, that's what it's all about, right? They just really love people. And I think one of the ways that manifests is that, and it's something I work with people on a lot, is to be able to talk to people like they are great, no matter what their current results are, right? So instead of saying, I worked with somebody who had to fire somebody a couple years ago, and we talked about it before. And so instead of doing what he was going to do, he met with this guy and he said, hey, I hired you because I believe in you, which is true. And he said, and you've been here working for a while and it's really not working. And we've talked about it a few times and I know you know, and I know. And so today I'm going to have to let you go. But I'm letting you go, not because I don't like you or I don't believe in you. It's just not working here. But I believe that you are great, or I never would have hired you in the first place. So I want you to go find that place where you can be great and where you can get the results that match who I think you are, right? And this was in a small town in Wyoming in the United States, right? Manly town. And he said a month later, he was at the grocery store, and he's an older gentleman with a cane and everything, and big, strong guy, but, getting older. And he said he saw this guy in the grocery store, and the guy locked eyes with him. and just started making a beeline for him. And he's like, I didn't know what was going to happen. Like I thought he was maybe going to come knock me over or something, you know? And he comes zooming over and he walks up to me and he goes, oh my gosh, I just wanted to tell you thank you, because you know what? I found that place and I'm doing really, really well. And thank you so much for believing in me. And that, I think, is great leadership.
The morals to go with the intelligence to do the right thing.
Yeah. It doesn't mean you don't fire them, but it's who you are being as you're leading them, even if you're firing them in the moment, to believe in people and to see the good side in them and to help them see the good side in them. And maybe it's not a fit here. Or maybe it is a fit here, and what do you need from me so that your results can be as brilliant as I think you are, right? I want to see your results match how great you are. How can I help?
Okay, so that's I completely agree. That's what makes a great leader. So then we've already listed a few of the amazing organizations you've worked with. What do those organizations have in common where they're so forward thinking that they want to bring you in to create those top leaders?
That is a really good question. I probably need to work on that for my marketing. So let me think about it, because I haven't really thought about it from that angle. But I think that when I get brought in, and this is actually, I guess, sort of, maybe for me even frustratingly uncommon, but I typically get brought in by leaders who have a vision for what's possible if their top leaders were just better communicators and had more emotional intelligence and could exhibit that. And you know, one of the examples that was just a highlight in my life was when I was working for JLabs in Houston doing a live event, for a live public event, and some people came from NASA. And it was, the woman who was in charge of the Orion project and the woman who was in charge of all public relations for human spaceflight. And they, they came in and saw me doing a storytelling workshop. And afterwards they came up to me and they said, John, you know what, like 5 minutes after you started, we were already making lists of who we need you to work with at NASA. And we're excited. We want to get you to come in. Will you work with us? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And I was like, so what is it? Why? And the woman who ran public relations, I think she still does, she said, John, we do human spaceflight. And if we can't make what we do exciting, we don't deserve to do it. And I was like, bingo, like that's right, that's good, right? And it's always been leaders like that, oftentimes who are good communicators themselves, who realize what's possible, because I think a lot of people think that they just should be good at communication, and they already are, and like I don't need to be taught anything, and right. But when we get alone, these top level executives lean in and like nobody's looking, and they're like, John, I've never really been taught anything about public speaking. Like I kind of made this up the whole way, right? And they're usually really, really good already, but they don't have a framework and foundations and principles. So it's hair raising for them, even though they're good at it, right? And when people get the principles and they understand why they're doing what they're doing, they get way more relaxed and it becomes way more fun, because they know why they're doing what they're doing and they know that it's going to work.
We're going to have to go down this a bit more, right? So you've just dropped in there the head of human space flight for NASA. Yeah. Okay. So
believe me, I pinched myself.
Yeah, I would.
Like they walked out and I was like, oh my God, there's this,
So how did you feel? Because obviously that's progressed now. We'll go into, what you do now with NASA, but what did it feel like in the subsequent weeks or months or however long it took until you were like, right, I'm actually going to NASA now to go and talk to these people? And I know you've worked these massive companies, but I'm maybe putting NASA on a pedestal because these people are literally the best of the best.
I do too.
There you go. Okay, cool. Okay. So how did that feel when you're like, wow, they're entrusting me with these people that are literally like the best of the best in terms of their knowledge, their understanding, their bravery, their commitment? How did that feel?
Well, so, it wasn't the first thing I ever did was to go work with the astronauts. I did a couple of other things for them first, but then at one of those things, there were a couple of astronauts in the audience, and they went back and just made the astronaut office bring me in for all the astronauts. So I got to train all the active NASA astronauts, and I will never forget that. Like, I mean, you know, that was utter bucket list, top of the, you know. And so I went in and we had our meeting in the astronaut conference room, which is this huge, gigantic conference room. And on all the walls, all around the whole thing, is every mission patch from every mission ever, you know? And then there's a big picture of the Columbia, right? And the people that were lost at various points along the way. And I mean, I walked in there and I almost couldn't breathe because it was just, it felt so like such hallowed ground. Yeah. And it was really, really tempting to be nervous, right? And get all focused on myself and, oh my God, I'm not good enough and whatever. But I tell people, don't be nervous, be at their service. So I reminded myself of that, and I kept, okay, it's not about me, it's not about me. I'm going to be of service. I'm going to give them my absolute best. I'm here for them, right? And then we went for it, and it was fabulous. And it actually turned out to be even much better than I thought, because not only are they super elite and super capable and super brilliant, and all of the things that you would expect of astronauts, they are also, as a group, some of the absolute nicest, friendliest, kindest people I've ever met, you know? And I'm really honored to say that I have a number of friends who are astronauts now, and I keep in touch with them because I just love them, you know?
Well, this is what I wanted to say. I know that you've had a massive impact on them, and you're still friends with the NASA guys, and also, you know, the ones that go up on the SpaceX rockets recently. Yeah. And also, I know that you occasionally get phone calls from the International Space Station. We've got to drop that in there. That's pretty cool. I even asked you earlier, what does it say? And you said NASA Houston. Yeah. And you pick it up, and it's a guy on the space station. Yeah. So the question I want to ask is, what do you think that you imparted on these people that left such a massive impact on their lives?
God, that's a great question. That's a great question. You know, I think one of the things that I do for people that I did for them is that it's really important for me through what I do as I'm imparting these principles to people to have them get who they are and just on a different level than people usually are in touch with it. Even people like astronauts who know they got, like, there's something they got to go out and the public cares, and right. But to have people really get who they are and what they really have to offer if they just share themselves more fully. Because I think, you know, it's funny because the astronauts, the two astronauts that saw me before that had me brought into the astronaut office, they came up to me after that training at the astronaut beach house, which was another hallowed ground place. Like, I've been these places I can't even believe. But they came up to me after that and they said, John, you know, we really loved your stuff and it was really good. We're going to get them to bring you into the astronaut office. I was like, whoa, you know. And then they said, but that stuff about sharing our stories and telling our stories, like, we don't want to talk about ourselves because it's not about us. It's about the taxpayers who make what we do possible, you know? I'm like looking at him like, I'm right here with Captain America. and I kind of laughed and I said, okay, you guys, I get it. And that's really cute and that's really sweet. And here's what I think you need to understand. You get to go up there and do that. And I don't. I'm back here on Earth paying for it. And what you need to know is that I want to know all about it, right? If you have a perfect moment, I want to hear about it. If you mess something up and learn a lesson, I want to hear about it. If you're ever scared, I want to hear about it. And what did you learn? And what was that about? I want to know all that stuff. And it's not about you. It's about me, the taxpayer. And now here's the next step, though, Freddie, is that's true for astronauts, and it's really obvious that that's true for astronauts, right? I mean, that's not no one's going to really argue with me about that. I don't think, most people. But it's also true about you, like no matter who you are, because we are interested in other people, and people want to know their leaders. They also want to know their colleagues. They want to know their friends, right? And the way that we let other people know us is by sharing our stories deeply and authentically. And the thing that I think people sometimes miss is that one of the big reasons to share your story is so that when that person you're sharing it with hears you finish telling that story, they feel a lot more comfortable and excited and capable of sharing one of their stories with you now, right? So and people are afraid to go first when it's stuff like that, but everybody likes to go second or third, right?
Yeah.
So if you are willing to take that risk and share yourself that way, you can open something up that just wouldn't be available because no one else is going to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so for those listening, what's like just a little nugget for them, okay? So if they want to become a better public speaker, a better communicator, they want to tell their story, what are a couple of things that they can try and do to allow themselves to connect better with other people, to your last point?
Okay, so to better connect, okay, so the first thing is, this is maybe sideways from your argument or your question, but when these executives say to me in confidence when no one else is listening, hey, I want to connect better with my audiences, I say, well, you've already made one fundamental mistake. And they say, what do you mean? And I say, well, you're already connected, right? You could walk out on stage, and instead of thinking, I want to connect with them, you could walk out on stage knowing you're already connected, and how's it going to go then, right? And that's really powerful to really take that mindset on. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I have what I call the 3 ways to connect with and inspire any audience, anywhere, anytime. And number 1 of those is a saying from a guy named Les Brown, who's one of the world's most famous speakers. And he told me this right at the beginning of my career, and it's made a difference for me since then. But he said, people don't connect with your successes. They connect with your messes. Your message is in your mess.
Wow. Okay.
Isn't that freaking brilliant?
That is so good.
So,
okay.
Yes.
So that's one to take away. One to take away is, don't be scared to share your mistakes, because that's actually where your power is.
Exactly. And what I will add is that he's not just saying get up and complain about something. If you've got a mistake that's relevant to your audience, or the one person in your audience, or the 1,000 people in your audience, if you've got a mistake that's relevant to them and a lesson you learned from it, that's really valuable information to them. And they will really respect you and think you're really brave for being willing to talk about that. And it goes back to like my story of losing $80 million. Like, I'm not proud that I lost $80 million. I'm pretty proud that I made it through that, but I didn't want to lose $80 million. But when Les Brown told me that, I realized I needed to talk about it. And I hadn't been talking about it, and I didn't want to talk about it, right? But then I started talking about it because I got that if I didn't share the lesson I learned, I was being selfish. It would only mean something to me. But the minute I share that story and the lesson I learned, it's now leveraged across everybody that heard it, that took something away, right? So I call it, and this took me a decade, more than a decade, to come up with these 2 words in this positioning, and I'm very proud of it. It's my one contribution. Insightful vulnerability. It's not just vulnerability, it's insightful vulnerability. That's what makes a difference.
That's what makes a difference. Perfect. John, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing everything. I've had friends who have done your stuff and worked with you, and they said it's incredible and the results are amazing. So thank you for sharing these lessons, and thank you for joining us.
You're super welcome. A pleasure, Freddie. Thanks.
If you like these episodes, feel free to subscribe to our Healthy Hustle newsletter below, where you'll get behind the scenes information from our guests, as well as from the studio operator who helps us create these cinematic episodes. It's also full of business advice and tips, and it will help you join the community of healthy entrepreneurs.